So, you just got a Quest for Christmas, and now you're looking for the very best games to showcase exactly what this thing can do. Well, the good news is there are literally hundreds of fantastic VR games on the Quest platform right now. Games that fit every genre, playstyle, budget and experience level, so you'll have no issue finding something to play. But if you want to experience the very best that VR can offer, experiences that completely embody why virtual reality is so special, games that leave their mark and stick in your mind long after you've finished playing them, then this list of 20 Quest games will leave you more than satisfied. I've played hundreds of VR games over the years, and these 20 Quest titles feel like the absolute epitome of what VR can be and should be for me personally. Games with incredible set pieces, engaging stories, lengthy or replayable campaigns, and the kind of mechanics you can only find in VR titles. These really are the best of the best on Quest. Before we kickstart the list, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Demio, Arizona Sunshine 1 and 2, Metro Awakening, Moss 1 and 2, and Into the Radius. All of you came very close to landing in the top 20, but were just edged out by other titles. However, they're all still incredibly worthy pickups for new and experienced VR users alike. Right, kicking us off at number 20 is Assassin's Creed Nexus, a faithful recreation of the iconic franchise built from the ground up for VR. With its slick parkour mechanics, Assassin's Creed Nexus throws players into 3 distinctly different large open world environments from the core series, and it lets players tackle a lengthy story-driven campaign from the perspective of Ezio, Cassandra and Connor. Each environment is packed with interactive objects, hundreds of NPCs, and of course, countless opportunities for incredible stealth takedowns. I guarantee you'll be grinning from ear to ear the first time you use your hidden blade in VR. Nexus is, of course, an Assassin's Creed fan's dream come true, but even those without experience with the wider franchise will no doubt find themselves enamored with the world the game immerses you in. If there's one thing VR is good at, it's showcasing environments, objects or creatures with awe-inspiring scale. And awe-inspiring is definitely the right word I'd use to describe the creatures in Behemoth. In at number 19 is Skydance Interactive's Behemoth, a game that will leave you breathless as you come face to face with the biggest creatures you've likely ever seen in a video game. Scaling and ultimately slaying these giant beasts will offer you some of the most memorable gaming moments you'll ever have. But outside of those set pieces, Behemoth still offers a thrilling, physics-driven adventure through a harsh world filled with smaller enemies, intricate environments and puzzles to solve. If you're looking for a game to really test your VR legs, or you just want to fight a 300-foot tall monster in your living room, then this is the game for you. Now, some people might scream at me for not placing this one higher, but please hear me out and also recognise that number 18 out of literally hundreds of games is still a really good ranking. In at number 18 is Stress Level Zero's Bone Lab, a finely tuned, physics-driven playground that offers almost endless possibilities to the right player, especially when you consider the constantly growing pool of available modded content and a dev team that continues to update and iterate upon the systems and content of the core experience. Bone Lab is probably the best game on this list if you truly want to embody a digital avatar. The movement mechanics and in-game physics might take you a hot minute to understand, but once it clicks, this game feels like nothing else on the market. The only reason it didn't land higher on my list is because the single player story content is frankly a little bit lacking, and players who don't want to engage with the endless sandbox will certainly get much less out of this game than others. I think there are only 2 multiplayer games in my top 20. Which feels a little bit crazy, but honestly, there are only 2 multiplayer Quest titles that I feel consistently compelled to return to for repeat play sessions. In at number 17, it's Dungeons of Eternity, a game that smashed past all my wildest expectations to become one of the most engaging, replayable and endlessly fun multiplayer VR experiences available right now. This is co-op dungeon crawling done right. Team up with 1, 2 or 3 friends to tackle randomised levels with the potential of unlocking some slick new loot as you face off against hordes of enemies that scale to meet your level, meaning the challenge continues to ramp up the more you play. With regular updates, a massive pool of unlockable content, and the hilarity that playing with the right group of people provides, this is a VR game you can easily sink 100 hours into, and you'll still be left wanting more. Every now and then I'll find myself playing a new Quest game and the words "this is the best looking Quest game I've ever seen" will fall out of my mouth. It's completely involuntary, and honestly the game I'm playing probably looks phenomenal, but when I take a moment to sit back and really think about it, I always find myself thinking the same thing. No, Red Matter 2 is the best looking Quest game I've ever seen, and it probably always will be. In at number 16 is the slow burn sci-fi epic Red Matter 2, a game that somehow manages to squeeze the most mind-blowing visuals you've ever seen out of a Quest device and then backs it all up with an engaging story, highly interactive environments and well-designed puzzle solving to boot. I've honestly got no idea how they managed to get this game looking this good. The lighting alone is so impressive that I've spent entire play sessions admiring the details until the Quest runs out of battery, and then I realise I've not actually progressed the story in any meaningful way. If you want to see a game that truly transports you to another world and makes you believe you're there, then look no further than Red Matter 2. Okay, here comes the horror stuff. I am admittedly a huge horror fan, so there is a chance that I might be slightly biased, but in my defense, VR and horror is a match made in heaven. Virtual reality has completely revitalized the genre for me personally, and if you're anything like me, a horror fiend desperately trying to find a genuinely scary game after so many scary games, then VR is the revelation you've been looking for. In at number 15 is my all-time favourite underrated VR title, Lies Beneath. A tight, challenging, disturbing Resident Evil 4 style action horror title that has more style than most modern horror games combined. Playing Lies Beneath feels like playing through the pages of a horror graphic novel come to life. It's survival horror at its very best, and there's rarely a moment in this lengthy campaign that you'll feel as though you're safe to take a breather. If you're a fan of Resident Evil, 4 in particular, or titles like Evil Within, then Lies Beneath demands your attention. It's slick, polished, and genuinely challenging. Where other VR games choose to go easy on players, Lies Beneath instead dials the intensity up to 11. Most people will point to Beat Saber as the best VR rhythm game, but most people are cowards. At number 14, it's the actual best VR rhythm game, Pistol Whip, a game that has no right to make shooting faceless digital enemies feel this damn good. Every single song in this game hits like a truck, and shooting, dodging, weaving and ducking in time to the beat is a genuinely religious experience when you get into a flow state. There aren't many VR games that really make you feel like John Wick, but Pistol Whip does it effortlessly. With its crunchy neon retro visuals and simplistic mechanics, this is a game that any VR owner will enjoy, and more importantly, any VR user can play, regardless of experience. This is the title I would point to for new users looking for something mind-blowing. For anyone who says 2025 was a bad year for VR games, you can point to number 13 as a shining example of why that simply isn't true. Wait a minute, what do you mean I've said that 2025 was a bad year for VR games on multiple occasions? Well damn, maybe I'm an idiot. In at number 13, it's the genuinely beautiful, melancholy narrative adventure, Ghost Town, a game about searching for your lost brother whilst solving puzzles and encountering restless spirits. Ghost Town is one of those games that made me involuntarily say, this is the best looking Quest game I've ever seen. Because honestly, certain environments here look almost photorealistic, particularly the authentically dreary UK streets that you'll be navigating during some segments of the game. Ghost Town is a slower title that focuses on impactful storytelling, believable environments, top-tier voice acting, and some of the most intricate puzzle design around. If you want a game that will stick with you long after you've finished it, then look no further than this right here. When you think about the UK city of Milton Keynes, what comes to mind first? Yes, that's right, roundabouts. Now, when you think of VR, what genre of game comes to mind first? Yep, right again, roguelikes. We have dozens, maybe hundreds of VR roguelikes. For some reason it became the genre of choice for most new VR games for a decent period of time. And despite the fact that lots of those games were very, very good, audiences understandably got a little bit burnt out on that particular genre. With that in mind, I have selected just 2 roguelike titles for this list. Both of them are incredibly good, and if it wasn't for the other one, which we'll talk about later, I'd comfortably say this is the best on the quest. In at number 12 is the exceptional Death Unchained, one of the very first games I purchased on my Quest 2 at launch, and a game I still play regularly today. As I've mentioned, if it wasn't for another game which we'll talk about later, I would say this was the best VR roguelike around. However, it is still the best VR archery experience by a mile. Death Unchained is a dreamlike roguelite that sends players on a journey through the realms of heaven and hell, equipped with a bow, shield, and throwing knives. This game has some of the slickest new user-friendly movement mechanics in this entire list, and the game itself is deceptively deep. It's fun to play as a newcomer, but it's incredible once you really learn how to play. Time for more horror now as we reach number 11 and Propagation Paradise Hotel takes centre stage. This is an incredibly scary VR game that feels almost like a faithful reimagining of the original Resident Evil titles in first person. Players find themselves locked in a hotel filled to the brim with zombies that never really stay dead. You can put them down, you can fill them with bullets, but you can almost always guarantee they'll wake up and chew on your ankles the next time you're wandering through these dark and terrifying halls. Propagation Paradise Hotel has all the trademark features of a good survival horror game. Scarce resources, enemies that don't stay dead, and an environment that makes your skin itch as you slowly crawl your way through it. It's claustrophobic and unsettling in the very best way, and honestly, my only real complaint with this game is that it ended before I was ready to say goodbye to this world. Paradise Hotel very nearly made my top 10, but the cliffhanger ending, which should in no way discourage you from playing this incredible game, feels cruel now as the dev team has shifted most of their focus to flat screen games and a flat screen exclusive co-op horror title. Fingers crossed they'll come back to VR and give us the ending we all want. This is one VR title that really does deserve a sequel. Oh look, another 2025 VR title. Damn, maybe this year really was good for VR. Cracking into the top 10 is a game that's barely been out for a month, so perhaps its freshness in my consciousness is boosting it up the rankings, but there is absolutely no denying the fact that Deadpool VR is a ridiculous, hilarious and well-made blast from start to finish. Yes, it can suffer from the occasional length-stretching fetch quest and a few moments of listening to character dialogue drag on for a touch too long, but on the whole, this is a bombastic, colourful and thoroughly Deadpool experience from start to finish that includes some of the very best music cues in all of virtual reality. If you're a fan of Deadpool, you'll find so much to love here, from the countless unlockable costumes, weapon skins and comic books to the endless one-liners, wisecracks and fourth wall breaking moments. It really feels like the perfect blend of the recent film adaptations and countless comic book versions, all blended into one expertly crafted VR action adventure experience. It's kind of odd, but the Quest has bizarrely become the best place for superhero fans to play games in recent years, with official VR titles for Deadpool, Iron Man and Batman all available now on standalone hardware. I wonder if we'll get any more soon. I'd honestly love a VR Ant-Man game, but I feel like most people want the other bug guy. If you told me a couple of years back that a remake of a CD-ROM game from 1993 was going to end up being one of the best VR games I've ever played, I probably would have laughed at you. But here we are in 2025 and a remake of a CD-ROM game from 1993 is easily one of the best VR games I've ever played. In at number 9, it's The Seventh Guest VR from Vertigo Games, a game I actually remember watching a friend play when I was just a tiny beardless boy, and back then I actually found it to be quite scary. The Seventh Guest is an almost perfect VR puzzle adventure with the coolest live action performance captures merged with VR surroundings that you could ever hope to see. This reimagining keeps all the campy horror and melodrama of the 1993 original intact, whilst updating the mechanics, visuals, audio and puzzles for a modern audience. It's a genuinely fantastic remake that everyone, not just those familiar with the original, should play. The final 2025 release to make my best of the best VR games list is up next, and this one is a shining example of how you lovingly port a PC VR or PSVR 2 game to standalone hardware whilst retaining all the polish, visual flair and overall quality of the original game despite working with lower power hardware. This is Arken Age, a physics-driven action-adventure game that prioritizes player agency in movement and combat over almost everything else. If you want a blade and sorcery style combat experience but one with a story, big over-the-top boss fights, tons of unlockable items, fully customizable weapons and a series of bright, large-scale interconnected levels, then this is the game for you. It's a game that took me by surprise when it launched for PC VR and PSVR 2, but it surprised me even more when it arrived on Quest, looking and feeling almost identical to those higher fidelity versions. You'd think the power of a PC or PS5 would push a game like this with all its moving parts and large open arenas beyond what's capable on standalone hardware, but the dev team took the time to release something genuinely impressive with Arken Age. If you want non-stop combat in a gorgeous fantasy world, then this is the pick for you. If you thought Propagation Paradise Hotel or Lies Beneath looked scary, then you are almost certainly not ready for my number 7 pick. This is Madison VR, a virtual reality port of the scariest game of all time, according to science. Honestly, someone ran an experiment with a test audience and had them play through a bunch of the best horror games ever made, and Madison came out on top as the game that pushed people's heart rate to the very limit, and they were only testing the flat screen version. Madison VR is a twisted, jump scare filled ghost story that traps players in the most cursed home you've ever seen and challenges them to solve a fairly obtuse puzzle centric story. The answers aren't always obvious, and that's what makes the tension even worse, as for long stretches of the game you might find yourself wandering up and down the halls of this house looking for clues. And that's exactly when the game will throw one of its unscripted, completely unpredictable jump scares at you. It's the scariest game I've ever played in VR, and if you think you're brave enough, you have to give it a go. It's really quite something. It might be an oldie, but it's still a goldie. In at number 6, it's the best VR zombie game on the market, The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, a tense, stealth action adventure that makes zombies feel like a genuine threat, and a game that challenges players to test their own resourcefulness. Do you risk staying in a location for a few extra minutes to grab that salvage knowing that hordes of the undead are growing by the second, or do you turn tail and run back to home base, call it quits and play it safe? Saints and Sinners feels like a miracle in the world of VR, a game that launched out of nowhere at the height of the Walking Dead popularity and ended up being one of the best VR games ever made up until that point, and it still holds up to this very day. Every time I hop back in, I'm reminded of why this game is so popular, the level of polish, the weight behind every swing of every weapon, the crunchy noise the game makes when you crack a zombie's skull with a knife. It's all so lovingly crafted, and it's a real shame that Chapter 2 couldn't live up to the lofty expectations set by the original title. If you need one single VR zombie game, then this is the one to grab. And if you're left desperately wanting more when you roll credits, you can always pick up Chapter 2. It's a lot like the first game, except it's shorter, there's a chainsaw, and there's way more bugs. I said earlier on that Death Unchained would be the best VR roguelike on this list if it weren't for one other game that I think just about edges it out. That game is my number 5 pick, the Light Brigade. One of the most replayable VR shooters on the Quest, and a game that looks, sounds and feels like no other game on the market. The Light Brigade is a blend of fantasy, sci-fi and World War action, combining otherworldly enemies with bolt action rifles and other authentic period weaponry, and that makes for an immediately intriguing game, but also one that I wasn't initially sure about when I first saw the trailers. However, the second I hopped into the game and felt the way the guns feel to shoot and reload, when I heard the sound of the gunfire and the satisfying noise the game makes when you land a headshot, and ultimately understood how addictive the gameplay loop is when heading out on a run and attempting to get as far as I could, at that point it all made sense. The Light Brigade is the best roguelike shooter on the Quest platform, and you could comfortably make an argument for why it's the best roguelike VR shooter full stop. It's addictive, it's well made, and it feels phenomenal to play. If you want to try your hand at one single VR roguelike, then this is the one you should pick up. Every single time I make any kind of best games list for the Quest, or VR in general for that matter, you can rest assured that Walkabout Minigolf will make an appearance on that list, and it will more often than not be very close to the top of said list. Simply put, this is one of the purest, most joyful and perfectly executed VR games ever made. It's an all-timer, the perfect multiplayer VR game, but not necessarily one that needs to be played multiplayer. Yes, it is always better to play a few rounds of golf with friends, but the game is also a wonderfully relaxing solo escape if you just want to play a few holes or practice getting that handicap down on your own. I often think the best games in general are the ones that focus in on one specific thing and then dedicate their time to getting the feeling, the sound, the look and the overall authenticity of that thing as close to perfect as possible. Walkabout Minigolf does that better than most, and the devs' dedication to releasing constant updates, new courses and supporting the game with more and more content cements this as one of the very best VR games of all time. I deliberated for so long about my top 5, and this is the game that moved around the most. On a good day it sat at number 2, and on a bad day it squeezed its way into the top 5 at number 5. However, after a lot of back and forth, I decided to stick it right in the middle. My number 3 pick is Batman Arkham Shadow, a triumphant return to the world of the Arkham franchise and one of the coolest games I've played on the Quest platform. Arkham Shadow knows how to make players feel like Batman, seeing that iconic silhouette as a shadow stretching out in front of you as you walk slowly down a backlit corridor, the feeling of chaining together punch after punch and mixing fistfights with gadgets and tech, the wonderful voice acting of not just Batman but the whole rogues gallery, and the impeccable attention to detail in the locations you'll explore over the course of this adventure. Camouflage games nail it all. It's clear they are huge fans of the original Arkham games because this really does feel like a true entry into that series. The reason it doesn't place higher on this list is a matter of personal preference. For me, the Arkham games have always been about stepping into the shoes of Batman, but Shadow spends a little bit too much time in the shoes of Bruce for my own liking. The sections confined to the prison as Bruce, where you spend most of your time retreading the same halls and listening to exposition and story beats, are admittedly important in the grand scheme of things, but the game truly shines every time you're allowed to put the suit back on. If we see a sequel, and I truly hope we do, I would love to be unleashed into a larger chunk of Gotham and spend more time behind the cowl. But until then, Arkham Shadow is still a shining example of how good VR can be when used correctly. I personally feel like we all moved on from Asgard's Wrath 2 far too quickly. The game launched in December of 2023. It was Meta's big title for that holiday season. It was even bundled in for free with purchases of a new Quest 3 headset, and it launched to some of the best reviews I've ever seen a VR game receive in wider gaming media. Famously stingy IGN even gave it a perfect score, 10 out of 10. And then a few months later it felt like everyone had stopped talking about it. Asgard's Wrath 2 is what so many VR users desperately want VR games to be. A huge, sprawling epic with 60 plus hours of content, open world environments that reward players for exploring and going off the beaten path, rewarding combat that feels impactful and gives players the agency to tackle foes any way they see fit, big splashy set piece moments and boss fights, and visuals that push the standalone platform to the very limits of what's possible. This is a traditional console scale RPG game that single-handedly proves how impressive VR can be. It's the exact kind of large, impressive, proper video game that VR has been crying out for, and it's a game I feel comfortable in saying more people should be playing and talking about to this day. If you had money for one VR game and one VR game only, this is the one that would certainly give you the most bang for your buck. Asgard's Wrath 2 should be in every Quest owner's library. And so should this next game. Coming in at number 1, one of the best games ever made is even better when experienced in immersive first-person VR. The game that changed the way gamers think about action games and the game that redefined what a Resident Evil game could be, Resident Evil 4 VR. In my opinion, this is still Meta's biggest and best exclusive title, and it ranks as their biggest and best announcement for their VR platform to date. Honestly, I remember the hype train before Resident Evil 4 originally released. I read every magazine article I could get my hands on. It felt like Mario 64 for the action-adventure horror genres, a game that was so radical at the time, it shifted the entire industry and spawned years worth of over-the-shoulder horror shooter hybrids that we honestly still see to this very day. Resident Evil 4 completely rebuilt for virtual reality, but with higher resolution textures, a silky smooth frame rate, physical interactions with guns, ammo, consumables and objects within the iconic environments, is an absolute dream come true. And honestly, it is now my favourite way to play one of my favourite games ever made. Except for a few cut or altered sequences, this is a one-to-one recreation of one of gaming's greatest hits, so it's no wonder it finds itself at the top of this list. This was Meta showing the world they're serious about VR gaming, and I hope they continue to invest in titles like this long into the future.